Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we react to the Sunday morning news shows we watch so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
I'm Aaron Maté. Good Monday morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Our website is usefulidiotspodcast.com. Please go there, sign up to support the show, and get bonus content. What a great way to start the week. Listening to a bunch of sociopaths and stenographers push a bunch of lies, especially about the mass murder campaign in Gaza, which we have a lot of today.
Right. And everyone, remember, please like the show. Dislike the corporate media, like this show. Give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. All right. Should we get to it? Should we get to the show we always kick it off with? And that is MTP, Meet the Press.
Okay.
Good Sunday morning and happy Mother's Day. Today, the world's eyes are on Gaza as the Israeli military widens operations, including ordering more evacuations from parts of Rafah, a densely populated area in southern Gaza, despite President Biden's stark warning that he'll withhold weapons if they launch a major operation. The UN says 300,000 people have fled Rafah over the last week. Now, last week, the White House halted a large shipment of 2,500-pound bombs to Israel. And on Wednesday, President Biden warned the pause could extend to even more weapons, even though the administration continues to send smaller arms. It's the president's greatest break yet with the Israeli government. And Mr. Biden made a striking admission that bombs supplied by the U.S. have killed civilians in Gaza.
The striking admission, I think, really, is that Biden continues to send Israel bombs, even as they're mass murdering people. That, to me, is a striking admission. It's not a striking admission that U.S. bombs have killed civilians. Everybody knows that. Right. That's like, you have to be a crazy person to deny that at this point. So Biden's just admitting the obvious, and he's doing it, of course, 7 months in? This is the first time he's acknowledging that U.S. weapons have slaughtered civilians, and he's only admitting this for the first time. It's striking that it took him that long.
I mean, yes, but it also is striking in that he's a pathological liar, and in that the media and the political elites downplay what Israel's doing. So I do think in that way it's surprising and shocking, but not in an honest way. It's it speaks to the dishonesty. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Well, speaking of making sense, let's hear from President Biden himself. So sensible.
Civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of those bombs and other ways in which they go after population centers. And I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet.
Note the way that he's admitted that the way they go into population centers, right? He's basically saying that Israel does not try to avoid killing civilians. And his big deal is if they do this in Rafah, they're going to be consequences. Given that he knows that they do this, where was he the entire time? Why is it okay that he was funding this and enabling this and legitimizing it the entire time? Right? Like, again, it's not a shocking confession as in the content of the confession is not shocking, because we all know this, because we know that Israel is not careful about civilians and they're not actually targeting Hamas, they're targeting Palestinians. But it's just shocking to hear them acknowledge this and then think that they're acknowledging this is somehow makes them morally righteous as opposed to totally immoral.
If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities.
It's a notable evolution from the way the president talked about civilian deaths back in October.
The Hamas-controlled Gaza Health Ministry says Israeli forces have killed over 6,000 Palestinians, including 2,700 children. You've previously asked Netanyahu to minimize civilian casualties. Do these numbers say to you that he is ignoring that message?
What they say to me is I have no notion that the Palestinians are telling the truth about how many people are killed. I'm sure innocents have been killed, and it's the price of waging a war. I think we should be incredibly careful. I think not we, the Israelis should be incredibly careful.
Remember that Freudian slip? The Israelis,
yeah.
not we. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a rare moment when he was being honest when he blurted out the truth. But note the way the host characterizes it. Like,
Yeah.
this is a notable difference from the way President Biden talked about civilian casualties back in October. Yeah, back in October, he was outright denying the death toll,
Right.
and saying we shouldn't trust the figures from the Ministry of Health in Gaza. When in reality, the only reason not to trust them is because they're an undercount, because so
Right.
many people are buried under the rubble, and it's just impossible to keep fully track of all the people who are being slaughtered with U.S. weapons. And the important thing about this whole pause that he's put on one shipment, literally one shipment of U.S. weapons, as his officials have made totally clear,
Right.
is A, first of all, it's one shipment. B, he still might undo that pause. So it's not as if he's like blocked those shipments. He just paused it. And C, they've already admitted, the White House has already admitted that they've given Israel enough U.S. weapons to attack Rafah anyway. So
Right.
this pause is purely symbolic. And, to speculate for the reasons, well, Biden's been facing these huge protests on college campuses, and he's heading into re-election. So this is something they can point to and say, look what we did to hold Israel accountable. It's just window dressing to try to pretend as if they're doing something when really it's the exact same policy.
Right. Exactly. And note also how he says it's the cost of fighting war, when he acknowledged that there were people killed.
But I have no confidence in the number that the Palestinians are using.
Now, on Friday, the State Department released a report criticizing Israel for failing to protect civilians in Gaza, saying the results on the ground, including high levels of civilian casualties, raise substantial questions. The report says it is reasonable to assess that Israel has violated international law in Gaza, but said the U.S. hasn't been able to verify instances that would justify withholding military aid. That finding allows the U.S. to continue supplying weapons to Israel.
Oh, they were so close. They were so close. They're trying to hold Israel to account, but they just couldn't make that last little bit they couldn't connect that last little dot. So,
Right.
oh well, the weapons
So
have
close.
to continue. But
Right.
yes, it's such a mealy-mouthed and cowardly report. So they say, yes, there are reasonable grounds to believe that Israel is likely blocking international law. We just can't prove it. Sorry, that Israel is likely blocking humanitarian aid and violating international law. We just can't prove it. So therefore, let the weapons flow.
Right. Right. Let the weapons flow. That's a good way of putting it.
Responding to President Biden, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said Israel is prepared to go it alone.
I've known Joe Biden for many years, 40 years and more. We often had our agreements, but we've had our disagreements. We've been able to overcome them. I hope we can overcome them now, but we will do what we have to do to protect our country, and that means protect our future. And that means we will defeat Hamas, including in Rafah. We have no other choice.
Look, it says Dr. He's saying this to Dr.
I know, Dr. Phil.
Yeah. So maybe Dr. Phil could host a show where he helps Joe Biden and Netanyahu overcome their differences.
Yeah.
It would be the really easiest reconciliation in world history, because there really are no differences. Just pretend that there are.
Right. That's true. Could be called like communication is key when launching genocide.
Exactly. Yes. There really are no differences. He has all the weapons he needs from Biden to attack Rafah. And this pretense that Biden is against invasion of Rafah, has a red line. It's all a farce. Just a complete farce.
Right. Before we get to the next clip, let's show that tweet that I had put in the doc, Wilson, because I want people to get a sense of the report that the United States has released on Israel's crimes or lack thereof. Okay, so breaking news: the Biden administration has concluded it is reasonable to assess that Israel's military campaign in Gaza has violated international law. And then go to the next one, please. And here's what they said. Given the nature of the conflict in Gaza, with Hamas seeking to hide behind civilian populations and infrastructure and expose them to Israeli military action, as well as the lack of USG personnel on the ground in Gaza, it is difficult to assess or reach conclusive findings on individual incidents. Nevertheless, given Israel's significant reliance on U.S.-made defense articles, it is reasonable to assess that defense articles covered under NSM 20 have been used by Israeli security forces since October 7th in instances inconsistent with its international humanitarian obligations or with established best practices for mitigating civilian harm. So note how even when they're somewhat, and criticizing is too strong of a word, but when they're even acknowledging or assessing certain issues, it all goes back to Hamas. It all goes back to their using human shields, a claim that has never been proven.
By the way, side note, what a strange term for weaponry is defense articles.
Yeah.
Like, I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, it's
a
pretty good,
defense article.
Yeah.
I mean, like the sort of the vague language they come up with to whitewash war is always fascinating. It's a defense article. It's like these bombs that maim children. It's a defense article. I don't know.
Right.
It's just very striking.
Very
But like,
strange.
imagine going to law school, or imagine like, you know, being an idealistic young person and wanting to engage in diplomacy and make the world better. You end up getting a job at the State Department. And then one day, Tony Blinken's like, yeah, we need you to write a report that basically pretends as if we're holding this mass murdering state to account, but ultimately doesn't make any conclusion that would interfere with arming the mass murdering state. That's your job. And that's what they have to come up with, is like use their rhetorical skills, use their brains to try to basically pretend as if they're writing a report that means something, when really it's just window dressing.
Yep. All right. Well, let's take a look at the man himself, Tony Blinken, talking to Meet the Press.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to start with that State Department report that did not draw a definitive conclusion about Israel, whether it's violated international law. Amnesty International says of the report, this is the, quote, international version of sending thoughts and prayers. Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen says it ducks the ultimate questions that the report was designed to determine. Mr. Secretary, is the U.S. trying to avoid holding Israel accountable for its actions?
No. We don't have double standards. We treat Israel, one of our closest allies and partners, just as we would treat any other country.
Oh, yeah.
Including in assessing something like international humanitarian law and its compliance with that law. I would invite people to read the report. They can see for them.
Like, Tony Blinken literally went to Israel after October 7th and said, I come here as a Jew, you know, and he's been going around the world basically acting as Israel's spokesperson, laundering all their lies. Every time they needed a lie told the public about Hamas headquarters under Al-Shifa, or about UNRWA being compromised by Hamas, or whatever it is, Tony Blinken and his colleagues have parroted that lie. And he wants us to believe that we treat Israel like everybody else, you know, just it's a regular country. And then they're always talking about how ironclad their commitment is, that nothing can break their commitment. But yeah, like that's what we do to everybody. Sure. Yeah, this is like a normal country, normal behavior.
Normal behavior, yeah. Total sociopathy enabling, yeah.
Themselves, everything that we've laid out in the report. The report also makes clear that this is an incredibly complex military environment. You have an enemy that intentionally embeds itself with civilians, hiding.
How can they keep saying this? Can any journalist ever challenge them on this claim?
No, they can't. And really, if you think about it, it's the most like uncomplex military environment possible, because it's not a military environment. Hamas doesn't have a military. They're like a guerrilla force. They don't have like heavy weaponry. They don't have missiles, ballistic missiles. They don't have tanks. They don't have air defenses. Like a complex military environment would be like, I don't know, two armies fighting each other, and the armies are embedded in civilian populations. Hamas isn't an army. It's a resistance movement that is fighting back against its invading forces, the invading forces of an occupying power. So there's actually nothing complex about that. You know, I've said this before. Israel doesn't have the right to fire a single bullet into Gaza. It's an occupying power. It only has the obligation to end the occupation. So there's nothing complex about that at all. It's the exact opposite of what he's saying.
Really insane.
Under and within schools, mosques, apartment buildings, firing at the Israeli forces from those places. It's very, very difficult in the heat of war to make a definitive assessment about any individual incident. But what the report concludes is that based on the totality of the harm that's been done to children, to women, to men who are caught in this crossfire Hamas is making, it's reasonable to conclude that there are instances where Israel has acted in ways that are not consistent with international humanitarian law. At the same time,
again, just total victim blaming, right? It's not about Israel making these decisions. It's and you're like, oh wow, he's going to talk about civilians, women, men, and women, children, women, and men. They've been killed because of Hamas.
I mean, it's such it's a really new level of whitewashing, because, for example, he says words like crossfire.
Yeah.
So when Israel bombs a 2,000, when Israel drops a 2,000-pound U.S.-made bomb on a neighborhood, where's the crossfire there?
It's between the bomb falling on the ground and the ground accepting the bomb. That's the crossfire right there.
Yeah, exactly. Like they even acknowledge that, like, they're bombing areas where there is no firing going on, but that they bomb them because they claim that there's a high value Hamas target there.
Right.
And their point from Israel and the US is that, well, it's proportional because the value of the Hamas target justifies killing, dozens of people who happen to be there. Now, even putting aside whether or not there's Hamas people there or not when they bomb, and whether Israel even has the right to bomb there in the first place, which I don't think they do because they're an occupying power, but there's no crossfire there. So it's just like what is he talking about? It's a merciless pulverizing of a defenseless population. That's what it is. So he's trying to make this out to be some complex thing when really it's the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah. Really repulsive.
We continue to look at, investigate each of these incidents, but critically, so does Israel. There are hundreds, as we understand it, of open inquiries into particular incidents that have taken place since October 7th. There are criminal investigations that are going forward. Israel, unlike many other countries, has both the means and the will to try to police itself.
Well, there we go. Israel's policing itself, everybody. So,
and they have not only they're doing that, Aaron, but they have the will. They really enjoy doing it, and they do such a good job, and they're so thorough, which is why they've acknowledged. The only thing I think they've acknowledged as a mistake is killing the World Central Kitchen people. None of the useless, worthless Palestinians.
Exactly, because those are white people who are mostly killed from foreign countries. And even in that case, they justified it by saying they thought there was a Hamas person there. So therefore, they could target the vehicle convoy not once, not twice, but 3 times.
Right.
And where's the accountability for that? We're still learning about atrocities like all the mass graves, the destruction of Al-Shifa Hospital, and many others. Where are the charges? Where's the investigation? There's nothing. And it's such a dereliction of journalism that Tony Blinken can go on TV and say stuff like this and not get pressed on it. They have to be prepared for these kind of lies and to push back on it, but they don't.
Well, Dana Bash, of course, is someone who is comparing college activism to 1930s Germany.
That's right. Okay, well, unfortunately, we have a lot more Blinken.
We need to let those play out, but our own process that has been underway for many months to look at individual incidents, that will continue as well. And when we can reach definitive conclusions, we will. But it's very difficult to do that in the midst of a war.
So once all the Palestinians are slaughtered, they'll take a look.
Exactly. Yeah, our hands are tied. There's a war going on. We can't look right now as to whether or not our bombs are being used for war crimes, slaughtering civilians. We'll do it afterwards, after everyone's dead.
Really disgusting.
Okay, well, yes, unfortunately, we have a lot of Blinken today.
Yeah, sorry,
so
guys.
Let's try to get through another clip.
National security memorandum that you signed says Israeli civilian harm mitigation efforts are, quote, inconsistent, ineffective, and inadequate. The prime minister himself said Israel assesses the IDF killed 14,000 terrorists and 16,000 civilians. Does the U.S. share the Israeli assessment that more civilians have been killed than actual terrorists?
Yes, we do. And I think the report makes clear that while Israel has processes.
That's not the right question. I mean, there are many right questions, but if you're going to focus on the numbers and you're saying that Israel claims that they've killed 14,000 quote unquote terrorists and 16,000 civilians, the question is, do you trust those numbers?
Right.
Because they're obviously fake. There's way more than 16,000 civilians that have been killed by Israel. That's obvious. And if Israel's giving us fake numbers, then why can you trust anything that they say if they can't even get the numbers right? That would be the question to ask Antony Blinken, among many. I don't know, just a suggestion.
Yeah.
Procedures, rules, regulations to try to minimize civilian harm, given the impact that this operation, this war in Gaza has had on the civilian population.
And yet you're still surging weapons to Israel.
Those have not been applied consistently and effectively. There's a gap between the stated intent and some of the results we've seen. But because it's so complicated, in the midst of a war, and particularly in the midst of a war where you have an enemy that hides in civilian infrastructure, hides behind civilians, to make final determinations on these individual incidents. We're looking at the totality of what's happened. We think it's reasonable to assess, based on what's happened, that there have been acts that have been inconsistent with Israel's obligations under international humanitarian law, but we haven't drawn definitive conclusions. We need to pursue these investigations.
It's just so painful to listen to. Yes, people are being slaughtered with U.S.-made weapons in front of our eyes. There's videos every single day of torn apart children, but we just can't make a determination yet. Right. Sorry. There's a more it's complicated.
It's nuanced. People love saying that too.
Now, if any of these TV hosts had any dignity, what they would say is, what's complicated about mass murder, slaughtering children? We can all see the images, but they can't really challenge these people. They will to a certain extent, but not anywhere close to what is the minimum when you're talking about mass murder. It's so sanitized. I've never seen mass murder sanitized and whitewashed in such a way. And that's Tony Blinken's job. And he puts a lot of effort into it, obviously. They obviously put a lot of effort in how they can come up with an excuse to not acknowledge that Israel is guilty of war crimes. Right. And this is their best result.
Absolutely pathetic and disgusting. Yeah.
Okay. We have more Antony Blinken.
Sorry, guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
You saying you haven't seen a credible plan yet for how Israel would go into Rafah and mitigate civilian casualties. Is it fair to say that President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu are not seeing eye to eye right now?
There are two things. One is that, as the president said, and as we said in many conversations over the last couple of months, there has to be a credible plan for the civilians.
Have you seen a credible plan?
We have to make sure. We have not. Second, there's something else that's important. We also haven't seen a plan for what happens the day after this war in Gaza ends. Because right now, the trajectory that Israel is on is, even if it goes in and takes heavy action in Rafah, there will still be thousands of armed Hamas left. We've seen in areas that...
So what is the point of what they're doing? They're not going to be able to wipe out Hamas? Does he want them to be more aggressive? What is the takeaway here? Is he saying, I mean, other people would say, and that's why you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, because you're not going to be able to get rid of Hamas.
Yeah, he's admitting that Israel's stated goals, which are not even their real goals. I think their real goal was just to destroy Gaza and kill and displace as many people as possible. But their stated goals of destroying Hamas and, of course, freeing the hostages, which we don't even talk about anymore because it's so obvious that Israel doesn't care about the hostages. But the stated goal of destroying Hamas is not possible. He's acknowledging that.
Yeah.
But, like, what is he doing even talking about the day after?
Yeah, they love that expression.
They don't have a credible plan. But who, like, we're talking about a mass murder going on right now in front of our eyes. So what is he doing what he's doing is trying to change the subject. That's what he's doing.
Right.
Because he doesn't want to talk about what's actually happening.
Right.
And of course, he takes for granted that Israel has the right to, destroy Gaza and then impose some sort of plan on it in line with its own aims, not its obligations as an occupying power, because his job is to protect Israel's occupation. That's what he's doing.
Right.
Israel has cleared in the north, even in Khan Yunis, Hamas coming back. So the trajectory right now is that going into to Rafah, even to deal with these remaining battalions, especially in the absence of a plan for civilians, risks doing terrible harm to civilians and not solving the problem, a problem that both of us want to solve, which is making sure Hamas cannot again govern Gaza. Israel's on the trajectory potentially to inherit an insurgency with many armed Hamas left, or if it leaves, a vacuum filled by chaos, filled by anarchy, and probably refilled by Hamas. We've been talking to them about a much better way of getting an enduring result, enduring security, both in Gaza itself and much more broadly in the region. Those conversations continue, and that's...
Yeah, so what he means is making a deal with Saudi Arabia to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. In exchange, Saudi Arabia gets bribed with like a nuclear program and other incentives, and Palestinians, of course, get sidelined and offered nothing because they're irrelevant in the eyes of Tony Blinken. That's what he's talking about.
Gross. All right. Sorry. Should we skip this Sullivan? He's just... do we need this Sullivan?
Yeah, we can.
He's just saying that they're not abandoning Israel. I mean, we can watch it. You want to watch it? I guess it's good to have a palate cleanser because then we're going back to one more Blinken.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. Jake Sullivan.
This week, anchor George Stephanopoulos sat down with White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in the Situation Room this week and asked him about withholding those weapons.
Israel's ambassador united.
First of all, look how awkward that setup is. I mean, this is like CBS. They have money. Couldn't they have gotten a better setup? Look at like Sullivan's legs.
I think they really wanted to capture the Situation Room just to show how super important this meeting is, and show us some drama. So they worked hard for that shot, Katie. I think they're very proud of that shot.
I guess, yeah. The body language is just weird. Stephanopoulos looks a lot more comfortable than Sullivan.
Yeah, he's reclining. Yeah.
Sullivan's like trying to shrink away.
States has responded to President Biden's decision not to provide some offensive weapons that could be used in the Rafah invasion, saying it sends the wrong message to Hamas and puts Israel in a corner. How do you respond to that?
Nobody has been a stronger supporter of Israel than Joe Biden. He has sent an enormous amount of capability for Israel to take on Hamas. Secondly, the president has made clear he's going to continue to make sure Israel has what it needs to defend itself. Full stop, foursquare, that will happen. And then third, the president has said that he has concerns about a full-scale military invasion of Rafah, a place where there's more than 1 million people sheltering with nowhere else to go. Well, first, because there's 1 million people there in very close quarters who've been pushed there because of the military operations in other parts of Gaza, you would have really significant civilian casualties. And while Israel would also be able to kill some Hamas folks, many Hamas folks would melt away because they're terrorists. They're not really organized fighters in the way that we think about a typical military. In that context...
That's interesting, melt away. That's kind of like a Wizard of Oz, Wicked Witch of the West connotation. I'm melting. Anyway.
He doesn't want to see American weapons used in that kind of operation. That's not to say that he is going to abandon Israel or cut them off from weapons. He was focused on a particular operation that he doesn't believe will succeed in defeating Hamas and that will cause grievous harm.
We're not going to cut off Israel. Come on. I mean, they're committing mass murder. We're not going to cut them off. Yeah. And again, they've already admitted that they've given Israel the weaponry it needs to attack Rafah. So these warnings, these red lines are meaningless because Israel has all the U.S. weaponry it needs if it wants to attack Rafah. Yeah. So it's all performative. It's window dressing. And they're given a free pass to do it because we don't, George Stephanopoulos is a former White House official for the Clinton administration. He's friends with all these people. Yeah. He's not going to hold these people to account. Ask them tough questions. It's a ruse. We can skip the next Antony Blinken.
Oh no, we have to play it because it sets up the things afterwards.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, yeah. Thank you. All right, here's Antony Blinken once again, but don't worry, guys. This is the last one. Talking to Face the Nation.
The U.S. slowing down the delivery of any weapons to Israel at this point beyond the 3,500 so-called dumb bombs.
As you know, Margaret, most of the population from Gaza displaced from the north and from central Gaza has gone to Rafah. There are about 1.4 million people there. And we've said to Israel that we will not support an operation in Rafah, a major military operation, in the absence of a credible plan to protect civilians.
And they still haven't delivered it. So are you slowing the delivery of any weapons beyond these 3,500 bombs? Are you pausing, for example, precision munitions, as some Republicans have claimed?
The answer to that is no. What the president said and what he's been clear about in private conversations with the Israelis, which unfortunately leaked to the press, so the president responded forthrightly when he was asked about it. But what we've been clear about is that if Israel launches this major military operation into Rafah, then there are certain systems that we're not going to be supporting and supplying for that operation. But at present, the only thing that we've delayed and are holding back are these high payload bombs, because we're in an ongoing conversation with Israel, given the impact that those weapons can have when they're used in densely populated areas, including an area like Rafah. So we're in an active conversation with Israel about that. We have real concerns about the way they're used. But here's something else that's critically important, Margaret. We believe two things. One, you have to have a clear, credible plan to protect civilians, which we haven't seen. Second, we also need to see a plan for what happens after this conflict in Gaza is over.
Enough. The point from this clip is that they are saying that besides these 3,500 dumb bombs, right, they are not pausing any weapons shipments, and they're considering maybe doing it, but they're not committing to it, blocking more weapons, and they are, as of now, not blocking more weapons, okay? That, though, is absolutely, that symbolic optics-based decision is too much for certain politicians, and they are freaking out. So let's take a look at how hard. Oh, did you want to add something?
Well, and before we get to that, again, they've also acknowledged that despite their stated concerns about Israel invading Rafah and them claiming they won't support it, they've already given Israel the bombs it needs to attack Rafah. They've admitted that. So this is from the Washington Post, speaking to a Biden administration official. Despite the pause, the Israeli military has enough weapons supplied by the U.S. and other partners to conduct the Rafah operations if it chooses to cast aside U.S. objections, a U.S. official said. So basically, U.S. objections to Israel invading Rafah are meaningless because, by their own admission, they've already given Israel all the weapons it needs to attack Rafah. So it's all just the same thing we've seen from the start. Biden officials pretending they're frustrated with Israel, they have concerns, while doing absolutely nothing, zilch, to stop the mass murder campaign and everything to support it.
But that absolutely nothing, Aaron, is unacceptable to people like Tom Cotton. Let's take a look.
He's imposed a de facto.
If you thought Antony Blinken was a sociopath, what do you hear from this guy? Yeah, what do you hear from this guy?
Tom Cotton's beer, yeah.
Facto arms embargo on Israel and sanctions on Israelis.
They're
in the
sending
meantime,
weapons this weekend. It's not an arms embargo.
He just said last week that he's not going to send offensive weapons. We have no idea what he's going to withhold.
That was, as we just exchanged with Secretary Blinken, not a very clear statement in that CNN interview. Democrats have said that. But what Blinken said there was it was just that one single shipment. You're saying you do not believe the Secretary of State when he says that?
See, this is a problem when you have a completely morally depraved political establishment across the spectrum. The debate becomes not like, why are we arming this sociopathic, mass murdering state? The debate becomes, look, the president only said he's stopping one shipment. So you're wrong, sir. They are arming the sociopathic.
Right. Don't worry.
State.
Yeah. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Stop smearing them.
Yeah.
By suggesting, Yeah,
and that's like the heated debate we get on corporate
still
TV.
Sending weapons, yeah.
And he's saying he's so crazy that he's saying that Biden pausing one weapon shipment is an arms embargo. That's literally what he said. It's an arms embargo.
De facto arms embargo, yeah.
But the crazy set the agenda. Like,
yeah, exactly, right. The
rather than being called out for presuming that we should be arming a mass murdering state, they're so devoted to mass murder that they get triggered and have a freak out when one weapon shipment is paused, and that becomes a debate as to whether or not that is too harsh on our friend Israel.
Yeah.
In March of 2022, Tony Blinken came on your show, this very show, and said the United States would be perfectly fine to see fighter jets sent to Ukraine. Joe Biden immediately reversed Tony Blinken's statement on this show. So what Tony Blinken says on this show cannot be credited when Joe Biden is out there imposing a de facto arms embargo on Israel at the same time he's letting arms embargoes on Iran expire.
You know.
That's the same thing. He said, Tony Blinken said, and I don't know what he's talking about, but let's assume he's correct, which I wouldn't trust Tom Cotton for anything.
For argument's sake, yeah.
Yeah. He says, Tony Blinken said we were going to send fighter jets to Ukraine, and Blinken didn't, and Biden didn't.
Right.
So, Blinken said that we were going to send fighter jets to Ukraine, and Biden reversed that. So we can't trust anything. And again, so he sets the terms of the debate where basically we're not warmongering enough.
Right.
And that's the debate.
Yeah.
$26 billion in emergency funding was just approved by the president. And there is not an arms embargo on Israel, and there is not a block on intelligence sharing with Israel. You know that.
Joe Biden said last week that he's going to stop supplying offensive weapons that can be used in an urban setting. That is the only setting in Gaza. That is the only setting in Gaza. And they have to go into Rafah. Joe Biden's position is de facto for Hamas victory at this point.
He loves
Israel's goal is to destroy Hamas, which committed the worst atrocity against Jews since World War II. Hamas's goal is to survive. If Israel does not go into Rafah and destroy Hamas in Rafah, Hamas will survive.
Well, the Biden administration says they can go into Rafah. It's how they do it.
Right.
Again,
important thing that she's acknowledging that they should be pressed on. But yeah.
But she's putting it forward as like in defense of the Biden administration. Right. She's like, well, they said they could attack Rafah. It just matters how they do it. So that's our debate. That's that's what happens when you let the crazy set the terms of debate.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, they're all in charge. And mass murder is just taken for granted as like a legitimate means of war. It's just no one questions that. No one questions it. Everyone accepts it.
Yep. And by the way, before we go on, you guys owe us a lot because we sat through all these clips of Blinken so that you didn't have to. So give us a like. Where are we at likes? How many likes do we have? Because we have
right now we got 1,000 likes.
I mean, less than half, guys.
Barely more than a third.
I think we should get that up to 1,000. You said let's get it up to 1,200 at least for right now.
Could people do a de facto like instead of a real like?
No,
make Tom Cotton
don't
happy?
Encourage that.
All right, so don't make Tom Cotton happy. No de facto likes, only real likes, everybody.
Yeah. Where are we at now? Did we go up at all?
No.
Guys, don't like twice, remember. No, don't like for a second time and undoes it. This is important, guys. I need to train you. Where are we at now?
Maybe mine's not refreshing. I'm still seeing 1K.
That's
impossible. I'm sure we're at least at 3K right now. It's just mine must be wrong.
No, really, where are we at though?
1.4K now.
All right, thank you.
There we go.
You guys are not being good, useful idiots, patriots. All right, let's see. What do we got next? Oh, if you thought Tom Cotton was angry, wow. Wait for Lindsey Graham.
Why does Israel need the most massive bombs that can potentially level an entire block in order to wage this war? Why can't it be more precise?
Listen, here's what I would say about fighting an enemy who wants to kill you and your family. Why did we drop 2 bombs, nuclear bombs, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end a war that we couldn't afford to lose? You don't understand, apparently, what Israel is facing.
Wow. He's angry at Kristen.
We're facing three groups. Iran, who has received $80 billion in aid. When Trump left office, they were exporting 300 barrels of oil a day. Now they're at 1.3 million a day. They've been enriched by Biden. They're taking that money to kill all the Jews. So when we were faced with destruction as a nation after Pearl Harbor, fighting the Germans and the Japanese, we decided to end the war by bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. That was the right decision. Give Israel the bombs they need to end the war they can't afford to lose, and work with them to minimize casualties.
Senator.
Okay. You know, Chomsky used to say that when you even enter the arena of debate with a Holocaust denier, with a Nazi Holocaust denier, to do that is to lose your humanity a little bit. Even to like open up space for a Nazi Holocaust denier and to engage with them is to lose your humanity a little bit. And that's how I feel about listening to people like Lindsey Graham. Now he's citing the atomic bombing of Japan in World War II as a positive example, when first of all, from a military point of view, that bombing, forget the civilian casualties for a second, the bombing was completely unnecessary. We talked about to end the war, we needed to atomic bomb Japan. It's false. That's just ahistorical. But B, that was mass murder, and he's citing it approvingly. He's citing it approvingly, and he's saying, well, basically, we should do the same thing inside Gaza. And again, using that as a historical analogy, the people of Gaza don't have an army. They're not trying to wipe out Israel or the U.S. or anybody else. They're just trying to live, and they're trying to not be occupied. It's like the historical analogs are just insane.
Yeah.
And he thinks that wiping out hundreds of thousands of people is a positive thing, and he wants to he's saying we should replicate that on TV. I mean, it's an open call for genocide, and it's deemed to be acceptable inside the establishment.
Well, you know what it reminds me of, what he's doing? It reminds me of when people defend Israel by saying, look, no one told the U.S. they couldn't do what they wanted to do after 9/11, as if that was good, as if that was humane, justified, moral, or made us safer.
Yeah, everybody told the U.S. Everybody with a conscience told the U.S. not to,
and we should have listened to them.
Yeah, including families of 9/11 victims.
Right.
There were people who spoke up very powerfully against.
Not that the New York Times would publish their open letter, because why is that relevant?
Like warned against invading Afghanistan and Iraq back then.
Yeah, they said not in our name.
Yeah. Well, Lindsey Graham says, let's do Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Which other people
military officials,
which other people look back on as a huge tragedy.
I mean, it's one of the worst. It's one of the worst atrocities in human history.
Right.
And he wants to replicate it. He sees it as a positive thing.
Right.
Officials would argue that there has been so much technology since those bombs were dropped that for that very reason, that is why Israel and other developed countries can be more precise. But let me ask it this way, because President Biden is not the first president to use arms shipments to try to influence Israeli policy. As you know, former President Ronald Reagan on multiple occasions withheld weapons to impact Israel's military actions. Did President Reagan show that using U.S. military aid as leverage can actually be an effective way to rein in and impact Israel's policy?
When you're telling the world you're going to restrict weapons delivery to the Jewish state who is fighting a three-front war for their survival.
The answer is he's not going to answer the question. Okay.
It emboldens Iran. It emboldens Hamas. Sinwar is probably juiced up on the idea there's daylight between the United States and Israel. The hostage deal is harder. This is the worst decision in the history of the U.S.-Israel relationship to deny weapons at a time the Jewish state could be destroyed. So here's what I would say. There is some hope we can get over this.
Who is going to destroy the Jewish state?
Hamas, Aaron. Haven't you been paying attention?
Like what's happening before our eyes is that Israel with U.S. support is destroying Palestine, destroying tens of thousands of lives every single day. That's actually what is happening. And Lindsey Graham wants it to continue. He wants more lives to be ended, many more lives. And again, is he being challenged on anything here? No, he's allowed to go on TV and say this stuff. And like the pushback is only, well, we paused some weapons before, so why can't we do it again? I mean, that's,
or maybe we shouldn't Hiroshima them. That's the pushback.
Yeah.
Right. Non-negotiable, the destruction of Hamas. Nobody in Israel will allow Hamas to be standing militarily or politically when this is over. How we get there is subject to negotiation. My problem is not with the weapons that Israel is using. My problem is with the tactics that Hamas is using, and the idea that America would not send a nickel of aid, echoed by a United States senator when all the Jews are trying to be killed by radical Islamic groups, tells us where we're at as a nation. The Republican Party is with Israel without apology.
Well, historians would say, why is it okay for Reagan to do it and not President Biden? But let me ask you about
why is it okay? Well, can I say this? Why is it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay for us to do that? I thought it was okay. To Israel do what?
It's not okay, you sociopath.
Right. That's
mass
part of the
murder.
problem.
That's the point. That's the point.
Yeah.
And of course, he can't be told that because you're not allowed to question the fundamental premise that we have the right to commit mass murder. You just can't do that on corporate TV. You have to accept the premise, but then question whether it's the right tactic. That's how it works.
Right.
On these
That's
shows.
the range. Yeah. Well, he's not done, Aaron. Let him finish.
Whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state.
Senator, again, military officials say the technology has changed. But let me ask you about how all
these
of this
military officials that you're talking about
let me ask you something.
Full of crap.
He got so mad he shuffled his talking points.
But again, that's her response to him openly calling for mass murder. She says, well, sir, the technology has changed.
Right.
How about mass murder is wrong?
Right.
Like, can anybody try that concept on? Like, we don't have the right to slaughter civilians, especially in mass numbers. I mean, even one civilian death we don't have the right to do, but especially we don't have the right to kill hundreds of thousands of people. Can anybody maybe articulate that point?
No.
On corporate TV?
Nope.
Oh, man. Okay. I'm getting as mad as Lindsey Graham. I'm about to shuffle my papers over here.
I know.
You know? Jeez. Okay.
Well, let's take a look at one more Republican who's mad about this. Right?
Well, yes. Yes, why not?
McCaul.
McCaul.
Sorry, McCaul's the other weird.
Always gonna get it mixed up. They're both.
Yeah.
They're both neocons.
Right.
They both have similar kind of haircut.
And both really into arming Nazis in Ukraine.
They love it. Yes.
I love it. Yeah.
I think what President Biden has done, pausing those weapons, would really make a difference. The Israelis basically say they have everything they need right now, even for a full-scale assault. So why does this pause really matter in terms of Rafah, if that is in fact what they decide to do?
Well, it may not matter, as I know it doesn't matter with respect to Israel. Netanyahu has said, and I've talked to him, I'm going to do this alone if I have to. You know where it matters, Martha, is a signal and the message we're sending the rest of the world that you can't count on the United States, can't trust the United States, that our allies, right, our allies and our enemies see this as well. So if our allies and friends see this as a trust issue, if the Saudis say part of this peace deal want to buy military equipment for the United States, how are they going to trust us? And the rest of the world looks at this. Iran looks at this. Yahya Sinwar got a victory by this administration without a shot fired from him. And I think Russia and China are right there looking at this too.
Do you think?
Oh my God! Everything with these people is always about a message to Russia and China, or a message to China, or a message to Russia and Taiwan. Like again, their argument about Ukraine is we have to send a message to China, and now their argument about Gaza is we have to send a message to China and Russia. It's all about using the corpses of tens of thousands of innocent civilians as a message to some other foreign state that has nothing to do with the current issue at hand.
Right.
That's how much contempt these people have for human lives, that they're sacrificial rituals to send a message to some other state. And he talks about trust issues. So if we don't help Israel slaughter tens of thousands of people, that's going to create
Saudi Arabia going to trust us? Yeah.
There's
something called trust, Aaron.
Yeah.
Maybe you should look into it.
Again, maybe Dr. Phil can be brought in to adjudicate these trust issues and help maybe these people find other ways to deal with their concerns about trust. You know, people have that fear in life, trusting other people. Okay, is there another way you can deal with that? Like Dr. Phil could say, is there another way you can deal with your trust issues aside from mitigating it by slaughtering tens of thousands of people? Can we work on that?
It's also so ridiculous because the idea that like that is a problem on the international stage, that people want the U.S. to give Israel more support. I mean, besides like the English government, most governments, at least nominally, are upset about what the U.S. is doing.
Yeah, well, you know, so many were on board, but they've had to pull back because of outrage from their citizens who are so upset with being complicit in mass murder.
Well, someone who has a slightly different take from these Republicans is Bernard Sanders.
We appreciate your being here on a busy Sunday morning. I want to start with your reaction to that State Department report and what you just heard from the Secretary of State who defended the report, the fact that there was no definitive conclusion drawn. He also said he has not seen a definitive plan from Israel to go into Rafah without mitigating civilian casualties. What was your takeaway, Senator?
Well, Kristen, I have a lot of respect for Antony Blinken. He has an impossibly difficult job. But the reality is I think any objective observer.
Blinken does have a really difficult job because his job is nominally to be a diplomat, right? But his actual job in terms of what he does with his time is to do anything but diplomacy and to facilitate.
To be a warmonger.
Exactly. So that is a hard job. Imagine if your actual job functions were the antithesis of what your job title is. That's a tough job. It is.
It's like being a doctor but killing people. Exactly.
To constantly pretend to be doing what your job is supposed to when your actions are the exact opposite. That's very difficult. Very difficult.
Everyone knows Israel has broken international law. It has broken American law. And in my view, Israel should not be receiving another nickel in U.S. military aid. Look, the facts are quite clear. Hamas is a terrible, disgusting terrorist organization that began this war. But what Israel has...
Bernie, again...
I know.
I mean, why is it so hard to recognize? Like, condemn Hamas all you want. You can hate them all you want. Sure. But you don't have to accept the premise that they begun the war when, again, history didn't begin on October 7th. On the morning of October 7th, and every morning before that, going back 75 years, there was ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, a decades-long occupation that began in 1967. And that's actually what began the war. And Palestinians have the right to resist occupation and displacement. They do. So you can't say that they began the war. It's just so ahistorical. And it undermines
killing of Palestinians, not just the built-in like daily humiliation and violation of human rights, but actual murder.
Yeah. And Bernie has tried to do something. You know, we have to give him credit. He's tried to curtail U.S. weaponry to Israel. But when you say stuff like this, you're undermining your argument.
Yeah.
When you're accepting the talking points of people who are facilitating mass murder, you're really not doing a good job trying to stop it. You're just not.
Yeah. Right.
But that's okay.
Yeah, but let's just finish that clip. Oh, did we finish that clip? No, not yet.
No, we didn't.
Right?
Has done over the last 7 months has not just gone to war against Hamas, it has gone to war against the entire Palestinian people, and the results have been absolutely catastrophic. I mean, Kristen, we're talking about not just 35,000 Palestinians dead and 77,000 wounded, 2/3 of whom are women and children. That is not the way you conduct a war in a civilized society to the degree that war is civilized. We're talking about 60% of the housing in Gaza having been destroyed. The civilian infrastructure, that's water, that is raw sewage now running out into the streets, no electricity. You are talking about a systematic destruction of the healthcare system there. Every university in Gaza has been bombed. And right now, most frighteningly, according to the humanitarian organizations, we are looking at the likelihood of hundreds of thousands of children facing starvation. The Foreign Assistance Act is very, very clear. 6201, the provision. Any entity, any state, any country that blocks U.S. humanitarian aid is in violation of law and should not continue to receive military aid from the United States. That is precisely what Israel has done.
Okay, so great. Besides the lie that this war started on October 7th, good statement from Bernie Sanders, right? So what we have is we have Republicans mad at Biden for not being genocidal enough, and Bernie mad at Biden for being too genocidal. What does this mean? Well, Chris Murphy is going to tell us what this means.
When you're being a good leader, you are often upsetting people on the right and the left. And so President Biden advertised himself when he ran for office as someone who would often play it down the middle, who would not pay attention to the extremes of the debate and would just do what he thought was right for the country and what the broad middle of the country wants. And I actually think that's where the broad middle of the country is. I think the broad middle of the country wants to support Israel's ability to destroy Hamas, but is very concerned about the fact that there are so many kids dying, that for the last week there's been no humanitarian assistance getting into the country. I think the president really is squarely where the middle of this country is on this conflict.
Yeah. And I guess part of the problem, we're out of time, is that the humanitarian assistance, some of it that got in, was taken by Hamas away from its own people.
That's right.
Oh,
Senator, thank
my
you.
God. How do you say that? How is she allowed to say that shit? She's basically saying, fuck the humanitarian aid. Like even people who support Israel sometimes pay lip service to the humanitarian aid being important, but not down a bash, because anything that is any misfortune Palestinians suffer is all about what Hamas has done. And remember, she also gave lie to the lie about mass rapes.
She's lied about so much it's impossible to count, because she's basically acting as an activist for Israel, not a journalist. And it's just like, it's so funny how she has to throw in a talking point at the end of an interview just to make sure that she covers for Israel. But what Chris Murphy says there so interesting. So he says the broad middle of the country wants to keep arming Israel, wants to keep facilitating mass murder. They just want a little bit more attention paid to humanitarian aid getting in, even though the aid has not gotten in. Like the Biden policy of playing it down the middle, as he says, has been to say we want more aid to get in while doing nothing to make sure that it does, because aid is still being blocked.
Right.
So
it's like almost like encouraging a leak in a boat and asking for more towels.
That's a good analogy. Yep. Way better than the analogy.
A lot of thought
people try.
That,
People try to draw to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But yeah, so Chris Murphy says, there's a broad middle. People around the country are saying, yes, let's support the killing of women and children and men in Gaza. But let's just let some more humanitarian aid. And why don't we pause a couple weapon shipments here and there? That's the broad middle, according to Chris Murphy.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, do we want to do a few more clips? I guess we can hear from Senator Chris Van Hollen, who's
oh yeah, this is a good one.
He's positioned himself as a critic of Biden from the Democratic Party on Gaza, even though every time he's given a chance to vote for Biden's policy, he votes for it. So he recently voted for that $26 billion package for Israel to give it more weapons. But anyway, here he is reacting to recent comments from Hillary Clinton, who last week on Mourning Joe basically mocked young student protesters and said they don't know anything.
Yeah, we should let's play the Hillary clip first so we understand what he's responding to. Sorry, Aaron. Trigger warning.
I have had many conversations, as you have had, with a lot of young people over the last many months now. And you're right, they don't know very much at all about the history of the Middle East, or frankly about history in many areas of the world, including in our own country. But with respect to the Middle East, they don't know that under the bringing together of the Israelis and the Palestinians by my husband, the then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, the then head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, then the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat. An offer was made to the Palestinians for a state on 96% of the existing territory occupied by the Palestinians, with 4% of Israel to be given to reach 100% of the amount of territory that was hoped for. And this offer was made, and if Yasser Arafat had accepted it, there would have been a Palestinian state now for about 24 years.
Okay, first of all, she's lying through her teeth about what happened 20
Aaron,
years ago.
because she's talking.
Yeah. But it's like everything she says there is a lie. We've debunked it before. No need to go into the details, but basically, Palestinians were never offered 100% of the West Bank. They were offered a Bantustan state where Israel takes all the major West Bank settlement blocks, and Palestinians get the scraps. And Bill Clinton lied through his teeth and said Arafat rejected this generous deal. He totally falsified the history. But even if it were true, right? Let's put aside the actual facts. Even if it were true, how is that relevant to today when there's a mass murder campaign going on? And that's what students, the ones she's mocking, that's what they're protesting.
Yeah.
No,
that doesn't change anything.
Yeah. She's so stuck in the past and her false conception of the past, her own mythology, that she can't even give a comment that has any bearing on the present. And she's so determined to mock these students who are out there, unlike her, actually showing moral courage and putting themselves on the line to protest genocide. And she's stuck in this 1990s, early 2000s, just fantasy land about a peace process that never actually existed. The peace process, overseen by her husband, was just an excuse to justify further Israeli theft of Palestinian land. That's what it was. But regardless, even if what you were saying was true,
right. Even if the Palestinians had totally were all guilty for what happened, right? Even if Arafat was the only one with any culpability, it's irrelevant. But Aaron, how people say if Hitler had been a successful artist, maybe he wouldn't have been the genocidal maniac that he became. So if Hillary Clinton had won the presidency, maybe she wouldn't be the revisionist maniac that she is now.
I'm pretty sure she'd still be a revisionist maniac.
All right, yeah, but maybe not. Maybe she wouldn't be as stuck in the past. She'd be more forward-leaning, genocidal maniac.
But it's just so weird. It's just because let's say Arafat rejected that deal. So does that mean Palestinians don't have the right to live today?
Right. Yeah. It means that they should be genocided into oblivion.
Yeah.
I know that's such an annoying and weird argument. Well, let's see.
And by the way, to one more point, if you believe, if Bill Clinton believed in a Palestinian state then, and she supposedly did too, why can't you believe in a Palestinian state now? Why then is the Biden administration vetoing every opportunity there is for a Palestinian state at the UN? They just voted against the UN General Assembly measure calling for a Palestinian state, the same one that she claims falsely the Palestinians were offered. Why isn't she criticizing Joe Biden for that? She's not, because she's lying. Everything is a lie, and it's just so desperate to justify mass murder.
Right. All right. Well, let's hear what Van Hollen had to say about this. By the way, if I were Trump, I would be so happy about that clip. I'd be happy every time Hillary Clinton appeared in public.
Well, yes, but the problem is when it comes to Israel, Trump and Republicans are just as maniacal, if not more so.
Totally. I'm just saying she's so radioactive that it's a good look and helps Trump every time that she comes out for Biden.
That's true.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
True. I mean, especially young people, you can see in her entitlement and her condescension why she lost in 2016.
This is kind of like a new version of the basket of deplorables.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes. Except now it's being directed at people who Democrats will need to win
Right.
in 2024. The deplorables was aimed at Trump supporters. Now
Right.
Hillary Clinton is turning her elitism and condescension to the young people who Democrats will need to win if they have
Yeah.
if they want to have a chance.
Although, also, who knows how many people she alienated? Excuse me. Who knows how many people she alienated with her basket of deplorables comment? I mean, it was aimed at Republicans, at Trump supporters, but yeah. Okay.
I think the point
Former
is
Secretary of
TLDR, Hillary Clinton,
Shut your mouth.
terrible person, terrible candidate,
Yeah.
bad for Democrats. They should really stop trotting her out there
Yeah.
if they want to
Yeah.
win.
Yeah.
Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said on another network this week that the failed diplomacy of her husband's administration was the best missed opportunity for a Palestinian state. She said that before. But she said student protesters don't know very much about the history of the Middle East or, frankly, about history in many areas of the world, including in our own country. What do you make of the characterization and the concerns right now among so many young voters?
She's probably like, what they don't know about U.S. history is that I'm president. They don't know that I was president and had it stolen from Russians.
Well, I thought, Margaret, that Secretary Clinton's comments in that regard were quite dismissive of students' concerns about the awful humanitarian crisis and high civilian death toll in Gaza. And I should point out that we should be able to keep two ideas in our head at the same time. One is the right of Americans to peacefully protest, but also the need to make sure that students feel safe on campus. And of course, we all.
This is why I call him Senator Von Hollow, is because even when he tries to take the somewhat moral position, he always caters to the pro-mass murder line. And that's why he always votes for funding Israel, even when he criticizes it. And again, actually, I'm sorry. If somebody who supports mass murder doesn't feel safe, their feelings are irrelevant. The point is, you're responsible as a citizen, as a resident, as a student, to not commit violence, not commit crimes. It's not your responsibility whether or not somebody who supports mass murder doesn't feel safe.
Right.
Like if Lindsey Graham doesn't feel safe because I don't support bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that's not my problem.
Well,
And
it's
same thing
also
with these-
so. Sorry, keep going. Sorry.
Well, and same thing with these students on campus. And again, you know who didn't feel safe on these campuses? It's the students, the pro-Palestinian students, the anti-genocide students who were attacked by Zionist hooligans, including at UCLA, where Zionists launched fireworks into the crowd, and nobody talked about
And
that.
hit people with wooden planks.
And there's still been no arrest for that. More than 2 weeks later.
Right. Or they've also been felt unsafe because of police violence. Like, these people, what they're saying basically is that Jews, they're insinuating, implying, or stating out loud that Jews aren't safe. But that is anti-Semitic, because Jews who are Zionists may feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. But they're suggesting that that Jewishness and Zionism are interchangeable, which is an anti-Semitic trope and very dangerous. And I'm sure it would have been nice if these people care so much about Jewish safety. I wonder how upset they were about the Dartmouth professor who used to be the head of Jewish studies getting thrown onto the ground. You don't hear people talk about that too much.
Exactly. But it is striking that Senator Von Hollen feels the need to distance himself from Hillary Clinton, because she's that radioactive, for establishment Democrats.
Right. Can we go a little long today, because they're just such good clips.
Wow. Okay. So some useful idiots bonus material for Monday morning.
Material,
Okay. Wow. What a treat. All right.
What a treat.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's go back to it's our last Blinken clip. It's very important, though.
Secretary, I want to ask you about the very latest on the deal to get the hostages released for a ceasefire. We know that the CIA director has since returned home. Did those talks fall apart because Prime Minister Netanyahu was threatening and is making moves to go into Rafah?
Look, it's important, first of all, to remind ourselves that Hamas could have ended this on day one. Well, this never, of course, should have happened. There was actually a ceasefire before October 7th, on October 6th, that Hamas destroyed in the most barbaric way possible, humanly imaginable. But every day after that, Hamas could have decided to give up the hostages, stop hiding behind civilians, put down its weapons, and all of this would have been over. It still has that possibility. The quickest way for this to end is for Hamas to give up the hostages. We will get a ceasefire that we can build on and build to something more lasting and more durable. The different teams continue to talk. It remains our view that the fastest way to get to a ceasefire, the fastest way to get hostages home, is through an agreement, and we're determined every single day to pursue that and to try to get it to happen. I think you can question whether Hamas actually wants to get this. It would also be the best way to make sure that we can really surge humanitarian assistance and better protect civilians in Gaza. Hamas purports to be interested in that. Its actions certainly demonstrate the opposite.
All right.
Really? So if I were Welker, I would have maybe mentioned the following news stories. Let's take a look at these headlines. Israel begins military operation in Rafah hours after Hamas agrees to a ceasefire. Next one. Israel will invade Gaza's Rafah with or without a hostage deal, Netanyahu says. So why is he just blatantly lying and pretending that a hostage deal would have stopped Netanyahu, and B, pretending that Hamas didn't agree to a hostage deal? This is just media malpractice.
Exactly. And again, the claim that there was a ceasefire on October 6th, it's just such a malicious lie. It's basically saying that a belligerent military occupation, the longest running military occupation in the world, that had Gaza under siege, where Palestinians are being routinely killed, whether it's in these periodic Israeli massacres in Gaza or in the regular assaults on people in the West Bank, as if that's a ceasefire, that's normal. He's saying that's all normal, and Hamas, by fighting back against that, broke a ceasefire. It's totally, it's just basically saying the Palestinians have no rights and have to accept military occupation. He's saying they're not equal human beings. That's really what he's fundamentally saying.
Really gross. But also just an overt lie.
Yeah, and then a complete lie, because Hamas has recently, many times actually, Hamas has many times said we'll release all the hostages if you stop the assault on Gaza permanently and release our hostages in Israeli prisons, thousands of them, who of course are never mentioned on corporate TV.
And they did that days after the 7th.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. Okay, well, that was a nice Blinken bonus. Any more you want to do, or should we wrap it there?
Well, then Chris, I think that's good. I mean, obviously, Chris Murphy.
I have one more clip, actually.
Okay.
One more clip. Congressmember Adam Smith, who's a Democrat. Adam Smith is a Democrat. He's from Washington, heavily funded by the military-industrial complex. And he was on Fox News, who wants answers as to why Biden paused that one weapons shipment, and did those pesky kids on college campuses have anything to do with it? Those kids protesting genocide, did they influence Biden to pause one weapons delivery to Israel?
Washington Congressman and ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith. Congressman, I wanted to start perhaps with the protests again we were just talking about. In your own party, the far-left members are saying that it is because of these protests at university that Biden has decided to hold back weapons to Israel. Here's what Congressman Ilhan Omar said. She said, "This is what young people across the country were protesting for. And finally, the needle has moved in a significant way. I hope we see more progress, but don't ever let people tell you that your voices are meaningless and your actions are worthless. The arc of what is possible is always within us to bend." So do you agree that the protests influenced the White House's decision? And do you think they are incentivizing further disruption as well?
Yeah, absolutely not. I mean, it's a ridiculous assertion.
And also, I don't believe that we can bend the arc. The arc is on a straight line, and that straight line says mass murder and U.S. warmongering and war profiteering, and nothing can change that. And kids, don't believe Ilhan Omar.
Right.
Go home, study, be responsible students. Don't protest mass murder. Get jobs and help pay for the weapons industry that funds my entire political career. That's what he's basically saying.
Right.
Incentivize the president's decision was two things: the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which you described, I think, quite well in the opening to this, and second, the fact that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has no plan for what's going to happen in Gaza going forward. And this is something the president has been pushing from the very beginning. Yes, destroy Hamas. And by the way, the notion that President Biden isn't supporting Israel is ridiculous. We just signed a $15 billion supplemental plan to support Israel. We have been shipping weapons to Israel throughout this crisis. President Biden has been doing that. He is unquestionably supporting Israel. And by the way, I was at an event with President Biden yesterday. Very first thing he said was, if Hamas would release the hostages, this war would be done. He supports Israel. He understands that Hamas needs to be destroyed. Yeah. But that's not it. That's not all that needs to be done. There needs to be a future for Gaza, and that is not there. Even in the sections of Gaza that Israel has cleared, Hamas is coming back. What is Netanyahu's plan for the future? That's what the president is pushing. Yeah. He supports Israel unequivocally, but it's not going to help Israel if Hamas just comes back, because there's no future for the Palestinian people.
Yeah, Congressman, you say that President Biden is totally supporting Israel, but I want to read you.
All right. So basically he's saying that Biden's decision had nothing to do with those pesky college kids. Don't listen to them. And yeah, the support for Israel continues unimpeded. And on that score, he's totally right. Biden's policy is exactly the same.
Right.
And I think that's the overall message from today, is that no matter what we hear from outraged Republicans like Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton, and no matter how much people try to pretend otherwise, Joe Biden is fully complicit in mass murder. And so is arguably the corporate media that does such a horrible job in covering it, but a great job in whitewashing it.
Yeah. They should win a Pulitzer for whitewashing.
Somebody just did win a Pulitzer for whitewashing. Is the New York Times.
It's called the New York Times. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe they can share that with their brothers and sisters at CNN and
MSNBC,
NBC News and all the other wonderful places. Well, what a wonderful way to start the week.
Yeah.
Very, very depressing to get depressed by these sociopaths and liars on TV, but that's what we're here for. And but seriously, it is nice to start the week because at least we can come here and mourn together. And it's great to see everybody here joining us, and we thank you for it.
Yeah. And I'm just going to read some super chats. Let's see. Wade Worth, thank you so much, Wade Worth, for your generosity. Thank you so much, Kathleen Kiesler, for your generosity. Thank you, everyone, for your super chats. We just don't have time to read all of them, so we're just highlighting some. And thank you, Inez. And thank you, MCFC. Thank you, Will Islini. And everyone else who left us important messages. And we will see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.